If you're listening to this, I'm guessing that you might be the kind of person who likes a good cookbook, especially those big hardback ones in the bookstore. It's great to have those back in your kitchen. But there are cookbooks that tell you how to cook, and then there are cookbooks that tell you something else, something more. After I'd begun to deep dive into learning everything I could about Chef Marco Pierre White, I thought I really should be getting his cookbook, because I was getting more and more intrigued about him. When I'd caught the bug from his little instructional videos that people had put on YouTube, the more I read through the comments under them, the more people kept banging on about how back in the day, his cookbook was a game changer. But not a game changer, the game changer. So when I finally picked it up, I realised how right they all were, because this cookbook, White Heat, drips with attitude, and it is not hard to see how back 35 years ago, it catapulted Marco to mega stardom.
Even the size of it, it's like, that's not for in the kitchen. You're not putting that on the stand and making recipes off it. This is on your coffee table. Look at the photos.
Firstly and most vividly, it's about the pictures. What pictures?
It looks like fashion photography. So much of it is just dedicated to this icon, almost this rock star of food.
These grainy snaps are steamy. They seem like they're flecked with carbon, like the underside of a sizzling pan. Marco is captured in the heat of his service, all sweaty, often gaunt, his cheekbones protruding from his skin, his waves of hair falling over his face. In one shot, he looks positively haunted.
It's about him in this punk rock. Look at him. He's a punk rock god, isn't he? He looks like he's just done a 2-hour set in a sweaty basement singing. He looks exhausted.
One shot that you see everywhere has him wielding a meat cleaver, all 4 arms out, with an expression that basically says, "Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough." This may look like a cookbook, but what it really is a gutsy manifesto, a war cry, a massive capital letter statement saying, "It's 1990, mofos. I have arrived with my incredible talent, and if you don't like it, you know what you can do." I'm Kieran Tracy, and from Big City Nights, this is Eat Me, Marco Pierre White. Episode 2, It's Your Choice. It's no understatement to say that back when it came out, White Heat changed the culinary world. Just ask Chef Aaron Paterson.
At the time, it was just so exciting, this book. I mean, the food, the whole sort of... you look at the pictures, the black and white pictures of Marco. I mean, he's a rock star, isn't he? Absolute rock star. And White Heat, and it was White Heat in that kitchen. Don't we tell you, it was stressful, and the food was... I mean, he was just brilliant.
Capturing this vibe, though, had been really, really smart. Rather than hire some cookery photographer, Marco had instead invited a different kind of snapper into his kitchen. A guy whose main gig had been doing porn photography for Britain's dirty magazines. His speciality, latex, as it happens. But this guy, Bob Carlos Clark, was gifted. His frenetic, dirty shots of Marco created the image of what we know and worship today as the rock star chef. So no White Heat, then no TV shows like The Bear or Boiling Point, no movie like Burnt. Now, before I really knew anything about Marco, which wasn't long ago, I'd presumed from these pictures that he must have been some kind of hard-living guy. It's very much the image. But this is somewhere where the image deviates a little from reality. You see, despite this rock star look, it was a surprise to me to learn that Marco was basically teetotal at this point. He might have always had a Marlboro on his lips, but he more or less didn't drink a drop. Like a rock star, though, there were inner demons. The death of his mum, estrangement from his father, working 18-hour days to numb it all and to drive his achievement forward. So, unlike a rock star, his addiction was not drugs and booze and rock and roll. His addiction was ever more grinding work, something that the photographer had managed to capture the truth of in his gaunt and haggard face. It just looked very rock and roll. But the food. Let's dive into the food for a minute, because of course here is where Marco's personality really comes through.
Using simple ingredients like soy and scallops and the crab ravioli with deep fried leek at the time. You look at it now and you think, oh, that's quite simple. But at the time, back in those days, this was not fantastic. But the flavours, even now, I'd put that dish on the menu now. I would, because it works and it's elegant, it's not overworked, and the main ingredient shines through.
I said cookbook, but really, let's be honest, most of these recipes are totally forbidding. One dish involves you slicing a woodcock, that's a small game bird, in a perfect half down its centre line, right through the head and the beak. Looks like something the artist Damien Hirst would have made. Another recipe in here involves lamb's brains. Marco's instructions here, quote, stroke off the membrane that surrounds the brain. Do this slowly and exactingly. Do not rush this process. All right, Marco, like, obviously when I'm working with brains, I do that all the time, duh. But the main ingredient shining through in white heat is an almost bulldozering cocksureness. I said before that it was like a manifesto rather than a cookbook, and here's why. It's because there are these little paragraphs accompanying the recipes that are like haughty little explanations of why the dishes are great in Marco's own opinion. One of which is so puffy-chested that he even slags off his own dish. A selection of chocolates that he basically turns his own nose up at. He says, quote, this is disgusting. It's a horrible dish. It's vulgarity, pure and simple. It's invented for suburbia. Like, who says that about their own dish in their own cookbook? But in the next paragraph, he's honest enough to say, basically, it's on the menu because it's commercial and he has to please the customer. Elsewhere, there are some choice comments on his red mullet with citrus, which I think I'll leave to Kirsty Bosley to read.
This is a nice clean dish for a summer's evening. It's a dish for a lady. Clean, not robust. I don't think women should eat robust dishes. Women are much cleaner creatures than men, so they need a cleaner diet.
Talk to me about that.
It's just stupidness, isn't it, I suppose? I don't know. How old is he when he wrote this?
27.
It's just a stupid boy thing to say, isn't it? It's like women should be a certain kind of way. Women are thin and women are dainty and delicate. It's just an outdated, stupid thing to say.
It's a bit of a weird one, isn't it?
I don't think women should eat robust dishes. Obviously, as a robust woman that loves a robust dish, I think it's nonsense.
A bit odd. But these were the kinds of daring recipes that propelled Marco to stardom. But even then, with his book under his belt, he is in absolutely no mood to take his foot off the gas. He pushes himself so hard, even after he's famous, meaning that by 1995, just a few years later, he will become one of the GOATs, the greatest of all time. He will be the first British-born chef to ever do it. He will be the youngest chef at that time to ever do it. When in 1995 he is rewarded with not one, not two, but a seemingly impossible 3 stars in the Michelin Guide. In food terms, he has conquered the world.
Immense! It was absolutely immense.
This is Marina O'Loughlin, an esteemed restaurant critic, formerly of The Guardian and The Sunday Times, now at the FT, who remembers this era vividly.
It was huge. It was absolutely huge. And everybody, everyone with even the most glancing interests in restaurants knew him, but people who had no interests in restaurants knew him as well.
I'd like to pause here for a minute and just unpick this achievement, because there's more to it than just having trained under the best and lived a life of graft to get where he got. Those things are true, to be sure, but there's an added element to this achievement that I find sort of mind-bending, and I'll tell you what it is. Marco's cooking, you see, was steeped in formal French. Michelin were a steadfastly French institution. Marco had achieved this accolade, these 3 stars, without ever having been to France, without ever having worked in a kitchen there, and without even being able to speak the language at all, which is basically like you or me trying to be a sushi master without ever going to Japan or something. An incredible feat, but it goes even deeper than that. Marco had never obviously dined in Paris, never dined in rustic France, yet here he was, recreating its most elegant dining experiences. But think about this for a second. Based on what? Books he'd read? Photos he'd seen? Stories he'd heard? People he'd trained under? He'd never actually even been. And to me, that is magic. And it was a magic that Marina O'Loughlin was lucky enough to get to sample. back in the day at his famed restaurant, Mirabelle.
I went to the Mirabelle, which I absolutely loved. And the Mirabelle was the absolute definition of glamour. It really was. It was extraordinary. I mean, I cannot tell you what we ate because nobody cared. But, the food was way better than it needed to be. You did feel as if you were in the centre of the universe in these places. You really did. You felt as if you were Mirabelle. You felt, oh, there's nowhere else on the planet to be at this juncture. Bollocks to Saint-Tropez. We're in the, glamorous centre of the universe. And he captured that very, very well.
It's extraordinary stuff for the guy from the Leeds council estate. But even with all this recognition, with all this cachet, is he happy? Not sure. Come on over to my stove here because I want to talk to you about something. When you look at his videos, Marco has this thing where he says, when you're cooking, always question what you're doing. Question what you're doing. And the best example is one he does about spaghetti bolognese and how to properly cook your mince. It's one of the videos where he's like at his most intense, but it's brilliant. He says when most of us normies go to cook mince, we move the pan around too much. He says you shouldn't move the pan because the heat loss is enormous. I was thinking about this and I move the pan all the time, but why am I doing what I'm doing? So he says question what you're doing. You've got to let the heat stay in the pan, and only at that point can you brown and caramelize and singe the mince for an amazing depth of flavour that makes your spag bol absolutely 200% better. So the point of all that, he says, is to question what you're doing. But you know what? Two things. First, I've somehow got raw mince on my little tape recorder here. But secondly, by questioning what he was doing, he's about to lead himself to the most defiant moment of his entire career. He's going to become peak MPW. Okay, the backdrop. It is 1999 and Marco is running one of the swankiest places in the whole of London. He has now been feeding the richest of the rich, the best of the best. 3-star food for round about 4 or so years, non-stop, 6 days a week. But this Michelin star thing, it's eating at Marco. And actually, this is something that Kirsty spotted when we were looking back through his oldest videos from years before this.
Even when he was young, he was talking to Pink Floyd. Can you imagine? He was talking to Pink Floyd.
Keith
my
Floyd.
God, Keith Floyd.
Who often looked pink after a morning on the piss.
Ruddy. He was a ruddy man. Let me rewind that back. Don't put that head in. At one point, he says, you think you know what you want, and then you get it, and it doesn't fulfill you, but you're stuck on this treadmill, this financial treadmill. And there was something really vulnerable about that really early on. So I wonder whether the writing was on the wall for a while. It's like anyone in any endeavour, can you imagine being an actor and being like, I want to win Best Actor, Oscar, and then you get it, and then you think, well, that didn't feel the way that I wanted it to. What now?
What now was an unprecedented mic drop. He basically decides to ring up the people at Michelin one day and say, you know what, I quit, I'm done, I am out. I don't want to be in your guide anymore, effectively handing back the stars that he had worked his guts out for 20 years to earn and keep. Now, this was absolutely unheard of. The thing is, it's only really regarded as Michelin who can give and take away stars. It's them who everyone's working to please. It's them who every chef lives in fear of losing their stars from. Yet here was the biggest of them all, saying, you know what? I don't want to be in your party.
I saw him quite a lot at that period, and I think that it came to a point where, he'd made his money, he's got his 3 stars, and it takes its toll. It does take its toll mentally, physically. He just had enough. He'd had burnt out. That's why he decided that if he couldn't be in his kitchen, he didn't want the stars, which is fair enough. Because he got to where he wanted to be. He'd reached his pinnacle. And when you've worked so hard and dedicated your life for that long, and you're burnt out, and that it's like a footballer coming to the end of his career. You've got to make a decision, and that's exactly what he did.
But this, remember, is not some humble mouse graciously shuffling off stage after a life of service in London's best kitchens. No.
This is a massive, beautiful piece of Trumpian bombast. You can't hand your stars back, but you can make a fantastically grand gesture of doing it.
He was burnt out, he was bored, but he was also above it all, as he himself has never been shy about explaining. So why not let's hear it from the man himself and how he tells it to NDTV.
One Sunday morning, I'm fishing on the riverbank, because I used to go fishing every Sunday morning for 2-3 hours. This little thought came into my head, that I was being judged by people who have less knowledge than me. So if I'm going to be brutally honest with myself, which I believe in, then I have to accept that those Michelin stars have little value, because the people who gave them to me have less knowledge.
Okay, this is an absolute scream. The chutzpah of this is off the scale. This is Michelin, like these are the most respected and important food critics in the world. But what Marco's saying is, what do they know about what it takes to do what he does? Can they do what he did? In the final analysis, no, they can't, because they're a food guide business, not chefs. So why, he thinks, should I play their game? And so let's be honest, in that capacity alone, he's more than likely right. Now, the other side of this is that, of course, many of the world's other greatest chefs don't air this kind of opinion. They just get on with things. But as an artistic statement, this remains an iconic moment in British and, I guess, world culinary history. Michelin stars? Yeah, eat me. So before he was even 40, he had effectively retired, hung up his apron, walked away from the grand stove. And at this point, at the dawn of the 2000s, it would have been so easy to become a TV chef. And it's funny because right at this moment, for whatever reason, this is exactly what he doesn't do. His protégés like Gordon Ramsay, Heston Blumenthal, they're just starting out down this road. And Jamie Oliver and Nigella, people like that, they are about to get over British TV like a rash. It is the era of the celeb chef, but not for Marco. He may have hung up his apron, but he is quietly getting on with business. He's like developing, running restaurants with really important people. And actually, instead of getting on TV, he says he took himself off to the countryside a lot, hunting, fishing, that kind of thing, bringing up his kids, trying to work out where his head was at. For most of the telly-watching public, to be honest, they wouldn't have seen him since those days of the impetuous, gaunt young man in the Harvey's TV shows. The next time they will, Marco will look very, very different. Fast forward to 2007, when a towering Marco would glower over a set called Hell's Kitchen. This was to become a new era of Marco. He had become what I think of as like mid-period Marco. A commanding, filled-out man who'd been through it all and back, and who was ready to put the fear of God into a ragtag group of would-be celebrity chefs. Did you see that Hell's Kitchen by any chance?
I did, and I switched it off. I didn't like it, and I didn't like it when Ramsay did it either. It's just a load of nonsense for me. I just don't like that at all. I'm surprised he did that.
Aaron Paterson wasn't the only one. This was another middle finger up to the establishment. The artisan, the genius, appearing on reality telly? Ugh. But I have to say, for me, I loved it, and I smashed through 2 series of it recently on YouTube. Because if we're really honest, we're actually all here for the chance of a contestant getting bollocked. Contestants like this.
I am Adele Silva. I started as a child actor, super young, but I guess I'm mainly known for Emmerdale.
Which is a British TV soap. Think Countryside and Murder Plots.
I knew that people would think, oh, here she goes, she's probably a bit thick. And as my mum had said, can't boil an egg, which was absolutely right. But I always like to prove people wrong.
Adele went into Hell's Kitchen not really knowing much about Marco, just the basics. But she quickly found out.
You know that he's there. You know that he's watching. You're aware of Marco being in the room without saying anything. So silence can speak volumes. And it certainly did in his. It was like, wow, this is a force to be reckoned with.
His volume, though, also spoke volumes on the show, leading the hapless celebrities through pigs, trotters, Dover soles, caviar, all while demanding 2 words back. Yes, Margot! It was frenetic, quite un-PC at times, but an unrivalled insight into how he actually runs the pressurised kitchen environment, which even through the prism of reality TV remains a place of high consequence, second-by-second decision-making.
There's like a physicality of like a great big bear, because he's a big, big guy. And like I say, looming.
2 scallops, 1 consommé, 1 caviar. Yes, Margot!
But it's really weird because you could have your back to him and be at your station, but you were just aware that he was looking at you. We haven't got eyes in the back of our head, Kieran. How do you know that somebody's like looking?
Well, I don't know, but I get the sense it's because someone didn't use the entire bottle of HP sauce on those grisly livers.
All of a sudden he'd appear. What are you doing there? And you'd be like, I'm just doing this. Just, yes, I'm just, it's a fear that it put you, like, it was just, I can't explain it. It was a fear, but it was a really good fear.
Now, seasoned Marco fans will of course know that the contestants scared themselves. It was their choice to be scared. But between the sergeant major commands and the ruthless booting out of diners that would complain, Marco had much to teach in this series, not just by way of ingredients and technique, but also of approach. Like on one day when he schooled Adele on the power of self-control.
I think I was kind of in awe of him, to be quite honest. You've got this person that has got this power, but is also so incredible at what they do and lives and breathes it that you kind of just go, I'm not going to disrespect this person. What he's going to advise me or the advice he's going to give me, I'm going to try and absorb like a sponge, because what do I know about that?
It's here, though, that I have an admission to make. I normally enjoy Marco's zero fucks given attitude, his cool, steely dispatch. But there was a moment at the start of this show that I really had to think twice. It's when all the contestants are gathered round a big table for the first time, introducing themselves. And the condescension he shows some of them is just beyond. The way he waves some of them off without even shaking their hands, without an acknowledgement of who they are, it's not nice. And I would say that moment really did make me stop to think, who is this guy that I've been putting on a pedestal lately? And actually, while I'm at it, there was another moment in this series I wasn't dying about either. There was a bit of an ugly spat, you see, over some language that Marco had used, what you'd call like 1970s language, really. He had used the word pikey, sort of like a derogatory British term for people of gypsy heritage. And what followed was really interesting. One of the contestants on this show was a boy band guy. He was called Lee Ryan. And he actually said that some of his friends were so-called pikeys, and he found this insulting. So, to his vast credit, he went in for a sit-down, looked Marco straight in the eye, held his nerve, and told him this was out of line. Now, Marco was not having this. Lee ended up calling him arrogant, and shortly afterwards, well, Lee was no longer in Hell's Kitchen. Even with the caveats that all of this is reality TV, both of these encounters seem to me like actually a pretty naff way to get on. But it would be a mistake to think that Marco ran Hell's Kitchen by being a big grouchy guy all the time. In fact, the reality was quite the opposite.
There was lots of things they didn't show. He used to make us lunch every day, all of us, all the staff that were there. Those things blew my mind, because he'd like knock together like a lasagna, or he'd knock together like a chicken pie, and it would just be like, you don't expect to be eating food like that of that quality for your lunch. I mean, I was so lucky.
Adele was more than lucky. She was, of course, a damn hard worker who would prove a lot of people wrong. She would make it all the way to the final. Alas, she lost over some bullshit with an underseasoned asparagus, but truly she was a winner, taking in all that wisdom that Marco had to offer. And after it all, she was able to put her finger on something that is important to the rest of us, to people like me, and maybe even people like you, no matter what kind of a mood Marco's in.
All this watching, all this stillness, it's strong. It's important to people.
Hell's Kitchen had brought Marco to the masses. He wasn't interested in fine diners anymore. No, now he wanted to pitch to ordinary diners, the kind that probably eat TV dinners. And how better to do that than by lending his towering name to one of the humblest things in all our kitchens, the stock cube. Now, you know the way that adverts can kind of work their way into all of our memories and our hearts actually at times? Well, this is kind of a case in point. Marco would hook up with a big stock cube company, becoming their brand ambassador. And the result of this are about 50 or so wonderful little video segments where he's lobbing top grade olive oil around like it's tap water and talking with the severity of a high court judge about these little pieces of cooking wisdom, repeating over and over, it's your choice. Now, the great thing is any fool can make what he's doing in these recipes, perfect for someone like me to have a go. And there was one in particular I'd been drooling over. One about steak. Marco says in the video that he was just tinkering one day and he came up with this idea. Instead of salting his steak, why doesn't he smear a stock cube on it? Interesting. So I'm going to do it now. This is what you do. You get a dab of olive oil and half a beef stock cube, and you just press it in with your finger to create a sort of, I don't know, mud, I suppose you'd call it. Anyway, once you've done that, you simply rub it over the ribeye steak, both sides. Here we go. And drop it in the pan. Ooh, very nice. So while that's cooking, let me tell you about why I think this is important. What Marco's actually doing here is working from first principles. He's starting at the base, looking at the steak and going, what am I going to do with this? Put on salt? No, it'll fall off. So he thinks for himself, I'll make a paste. Then he tinkers, experiments, and comes up with something that's all his own. I think that's pretty cool. I think in all of our own endeavours in life, that's a good thing to do, to learn by doing. And I think we're at, and actually, I think we're at the moment of truth. I'm going to turn this steak here and, oh boys and dear, look at that big sear. Seems to be working pretty well at the minute. Nice crispy sear. That's what we're all after. So of course I'm going to take this off the heat, let it rest for a while, and in a moment I'll let you know how it's done. So it's rested, it's plated up, and I've even got out my special wee steak knife, the ones that usually come out on date night, so this is important. Now here we go. Is this good? Hell yeah. Holy moly. That's really, really good. Great sear, big beefy flavour. That's what matters to me. So that's pretty cool. But not everyone's convinced. Aaron Paterson.
You know, for me, I probably wouldn't rub a stock cube all over a fillet of beef, for example. I just wouldn't do it.
Is there something in that, or is that just...
Yeah, he's trying to sell the stock cube. That's what he's doing.
You know what's funny is that all the way back to White Heat, 20 years in the past at this stage, he's actually talking about stock cubes. And let's face it, you don't have to use them. It's your choice. These were the little videos that brought me here, and for that, they keep a place in my heart. But it was Marco's next choice, his choice, that would really prove, how can I say, extremely perplexing, even for a maverick like him. Put yourself in his position for a minute. You've got the experience, yep. You've got the unmatched credibility, the image. Who would you hook up with? He could have advertised like some wine, some fine smoked salmon, whatever, and people would have been like, yep, totally legit. But who does he hook up with next? Yep, Bernard Matthews, the British firm behind the infamous Turkey Twizzler product, which at one time had become the icon of everything shit about shit food in Britain. Back then, the firm's reputation was in the doldrums, and it was somehow Marco who'd hook up with them to polish the image of their farmed poultry, something that left quite a bad taste in the mouths of critics. Even by Marco's standards, this was an off-the-wall choice, because you have to remember the context here. A few years before, TV chef and cheeky national treasure Jamie Oliver, he'd led this big campaign to get this stuff out of school dinners, you probably remember, a battle that had really captured the mood. But taking up his new endorsement, Marco being Marco comes out in a newspaper that's saying, nope, Jamie got it wrong, pointing to the unhelpful elephant in the room, which was that if there was no farmed poultry, many people couldn't even afford meat, full stop. An unpopular but undeniable home truth. Still though, taking on Jamie and repping for a company whose reputation was in the basement, this was just not cool, no matter how determined you are to reach the ordinary folk. And this is where some of the sheen, it must be said, starts to rub off. This is not the stuff of white heat, not the stuff of dynamism, excellence and brio. From here on, this association is something the critics are not going to drop. But when was the last time you think Marco Pierre White cared about what a critic had to say? Listen to his characteristically blunt response when one brave journalist had the courage to put this to him. Marco, people are saying you've sold yourself out as a chef. It's from Restaurant magazine.
Well, firstly, I'm allowed to make a living. I have a family. I have my children. I have to create security for them, and I have to feed them. You cannot criticise a man for going to work. You really cannot. And you know something? It allows me to stand onto a bigger stage and to share my knowledge and to enrich people's lives. That's what's important for me. Michelin stars, they're my past.
He couldn't be any clearer. Marco Pierre White had led the rock and roll journey of a lifetime to win his Michelin stars. It was his enduring triumph. So too was walking away. That was his remaking. All of this was his choice. All of that though, those were old clothes now. He was throwing them off, determined now to give a fanfare to the common man and woman and child's portions in eateries everywhere. In the next and final episode of this series, we're going mass Marco as the big man's mega brand lands on your high street.
I don't think Marco, by the way, would be offended at being called Wetherspoons adjacent, because that's just classist.
For a fan, and I was a fan, you feel traduced by it. You feel so let down.
But what's this? A new generation of fans ready to try the impossible, to revisit those white heat recipes, his most fearsome dishes, all while listening to a new voice. The voice of a master turned old Father Time.
He's just one of those characters. He's got the mystery to him, he's got the darkness to him that draws you in.
It was like listening to David Attenborough talking about a blue whale, but it's Marco and he's talking about pie.
There, all in episode 3. From Big City Nights, this is Eat Me, Series 1, Marco Pierre White. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.